Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today I will be reciting a speech on witchcraft that I gave my junior year in high school. I realized that I accidentally deleted the more refined drafts of this speech, so here's the original. Rereading this speech, I realized that it is quite the rough draft, and I did not cite my sources well, but I really enjoyed writing it, so here it is in its entirety. In the future, I will be going over each part of it with more information so it makes more sense and the sources are properly known. Let's begin. If I told you to take a moment, close your eyes, and imagine what a witch is, there's a good chance you'd see an old woman, maybe with warts, green skin, or perhaps meeting with the devil. These are all popular stereotypes about witches, which I can tell you are false. You can blame warts on the witch hunters of the persecution days who sought out the devil's mark, thought to be the place where Satan marked his followers after consummating their pact for power. The green skin can be blamed on the Wizard of Oz, where the first green witch was portrayed by Margaret Hamilton in Technicolor. As for the devil, that goes back to the Christian church trying to root out paganism. Witches are not evil women worshipping the devil, but real people of any gender worshipping the old gods. Among others, some things that many people often misunderstand about the craft are the word witch, what witches believe, and the history of the craft. As explained by Alexandrian high priest Brian Cain, there are 4 definitions of the word witch. The Anglo-Saxon language gave us much of our modern English language. The word witch comes from the Old English word for the wise people, spelled W-I-C-C-A. This word, often pronounced Wicca, is an old word for male witch. However, today we mispronounce this word, as it would have been pronounced by the Saxons as Wicca. Where W-I-C-C-A means a male witch, W-I-C-C-E means a female witch. As English today is not a gendered language, we can take off the A and the E at the end of the old words, and we're left simply with witch. This is the oldest definition of the word witch that we have. Next, we have the definition used by the witch hunters in the persecution days. This definition was a person, typically female, who practiced dark magic, poisoned people of power, murdered children, or made pacts with a higher power at the crossroads, that higher power usually being Diana, the goddess of the moon, or the devil. In Deuteronomy 18:10, it is stated, "Let no one be found among you who sacrifices their son or daughter in the fire, who practices divination or sorcery, interprets omens, engages in witchcraft, casts spells, is a medium or spiritist, or who consults the dead." This is one example of the Bible condemning what they believed witchcraft to be. Witches do not perform the sacrifice of any living being. We sacrifice the power raised in a magic circle, and the power comes from our bodies in flowing blood. Witches do, however, practice divination, interpretation of omens, and sometimes even consult the dead. But one must remember that the Jewish and Christian priesthood practice exactly what is being condemned in that passage. In both religions, we seek successful prophets delivering their prophecies, which is divination. Prayers to the saints, the angels, or to Mary and Jesus are all ways of consulting the dead. To continue with the witch hunters, it is very obvious after doing any in-depth research into the trials that these men hunting down witches were often very vile and sadistic men who would get off on torturing these women and abuse their power to do what they wanted. Moving on from the persecution days, we have the English definition of the word witchcraft. This can most prominently be seen when the English colonizers came through Africa. Africa is full of various religious traditions with their own forms of folk magic. These colonizers were white, Christian Englishmen who knew only their English word, witch, and labeled every folk tradition as witchcraft. Even outside of the craft, one should be able to see just how wrong this is. These native religions are not English, nor are they Christian. They all have deep and beautiful histories. If you go to these people practicing these traditions, if you actually speak to them, you'll realize that they don't want to be called witches, and they don't want their tradition to be called witchcraft. They want to use their native language and the words they chose. If you think about these Englishmen labeling any person who practiced magic as a witch, it is no different than calling every red sauce ketchup. It's just not accurate. Finally, we have the British traditional witchcraft definition. This is the most accurate definition, beginning with the New Forest Coven in Britain and the high priest Gerald Gardner. In traditional craft, there is a basic structure to the practice. There is a magic circle where the worship takes place. There is a high priest, a high priestess, and a system of 3 degrees of initiation among the coven members. In this magic circle, the witches invoke the god and goddess of the craft. Ritual celebrations take place every month at the full moon and about every month and a half for rituals following the yearly cycle. These witches are members of a priesthood following the practices of the ancient people of the world. Of course, there is more to witchcraft than casting spells and divining the future. We also have a belief system, as all religions do. There are old laws in the craft, including a level of secrecy, the roles of the high priest and priestess, and morality among the priesthood. One law that is typically followed by many witches is called the Wiccan Rede, which states, 8 words the Wiccan Rede fulfill, and in harm none, do what ye will. This can be restated in modern English as 8 words the witch's creed fulfill, if it harms none, do what you will. It must be remembered that a rede or a creed is not a law, it is a word of advice. It's a good idea not to cause harm to others, but it's not required. The same as it's a good idea to tie your shoes before crossing the street. You can cross with untied laces and you'll probably make it just fine, but you might trip. Witchcraft is a lunar-based fertility cult. In the old days, the witches used their magic to heal the sick, assist in childbirth, and to make the crops grow. Nowadays, as we have more advanced technology and to assist in healing, childbirth, and agriculture, fertility is often a means of manifesting your life and empowering yourself and others. Aside from this breed of magic, there is a worshipful aspect of magic. Witches worship 2 primary deities, a horned god and a moon goddess. Witchcraft is often called the old religion, and this is because our practices are influenced by the ancient people, worshipping the first god and goddess archetypes ever known. The god of witchcraft is depicted with horns because the ancient people were hunters and gatherers. The animals hunted for meat were often horned creatures, sacrificed in the name of God. As these creatures were horned, it makes sense that their god would be horned as well. It's true the Christian devil is also seen with horns, but this is really because the church wanted to root out paganism, so the god of the old became the devil of the new. Throughout the Old Testament, rather as seen as something evil, horns were a symbol of God giving power. In fact, there's a statue of Moses in the Vatican where he is depicted with horns. Alongside this god, witches recognize the moon goddess. As the moon operates on a 28-day cycle, it makes sense that the moon would connect to a woman's menstrual cycle and be seen as a divine feminine figure. The moon is the mother of witches, influencing all creatures of the earth as the light waxes and wanes. Witches also believe in the idea of reincarnation. Where there is life, there is death, and from death we are reborn. Through the cycle of life, our souls grow and develop, and when our souls pass, we are given another life in which we see the challenges we need to face and the lessons we have yet to learn. With every religion, there is a history here. Many mystery cults of the past have influenced the practice of witchcraft as is known today, but one of the most prominent would be the cult of Isis. For those not familiar with ancient mythology, Isis is known as one of the greatest goddesses of Egypt, being a goddess of the moon, life, and magic. She is a protectress of women and children and works to heal the sick. The mystery cult dedicated to her worship began in Egypt, but was widespread in the ancient world, including ancient Rome. Isis was also called the goddess of 10,000 names, because she is the mother of all mothers, and there is a belief that all goddesses are one goddess. The kind of worship and dedication seen in the cult of Isis lasted until the rise of the church, where the pagan religions were snuffed out and witches were hunted by the structure of books like Demonology and the Malleus Maleficarum. After a period of persecution, the witch trials came to an end with the last official execution of Janet Horne in 1727. Later, the Act of 1735 was passed, outlawing the hunting and executing of witches, though not lifting restraints on the actual practice of witchcraft. In 1944, Helen Duncan was jailed under the Witchcraft Act after accusations of summoning spirits. After spending 9 months in prison, Duncan was released, and shortly after, the Witchcraft Act was repealed. Under the Witchcraft Act, a book called High Magic's Aid was published under the pseudonym Sire. This novel described the rituals and worship of the craft that, to the public eye, is only a work of fiction, but meant something special to other members of the craft. With the act repealed, the man called Sire was able to come into the light. This man, named Gerald Gardner, had published the novel under his craft name, and after working with a few other covens of witches who all believed themselves to be the last of the witch cult, they compiled their core beliefs and spread the word of what would eventually be called Gardnerian witchcraft. Lineage is important in traditional craft, and Gardner's witches can trace their lineage back to him through his descended priests and priestesses, namely Patricia Crowther, Lois Bourne, Eleanor Raybone, and Monique Wilson. Another well-known witch would also come to found a tradition of witchcraft. Alex Sanders, born Oral Alexander Carter, on June 6, 1926, told the story of his grandmother, Mary Bibby, who taught him about the craft and initiated him at the age of 7 in a lurid sexual rite, drawing blood from his scrotum on her kitchen floor. This story is likely false, as he also claimed to have copied his Book of Shadows from her, though much of the poetry was written by Doreen Valiente in the 60s. This story was likely a way to draw the media's attention away from his true initiation story, which probably came from a secret Gardnerian high priestess. A young witch by the name of Maxine Morris would come to be Alex's high priestess and wife, the famed Maxine Sanders, Witch Queen. As you may have noticed, I have only referred to the craft as such, the craft. Our religion is witchcraft. This may ruffle a few feathers, but there is no such thing as a religion called Wicca. As I stated before, Wicca, properly pronounced as Wicca, is an Old English word for a male witch. With the establishment of the Church of Satan in 1966 and the growth of the church into 1980, followed by the satanic panic of the 1980s through the early 1990s, many people became fearful of witches again, as Anton LaVey, the founder of the church, called his followers witches. To the initiates of the craft, the word Wicca was sacred, and it was a way to identify themselves to other initiates without the discrimination from outsiders. From the danger of persecution, there came a disconnect between witchcraft and what is now called Wicca. What many people will tell you today is that witchcraft is a practice, and a witch is a person who practices magic, and often follows the definition of witchcraft by English colonizers who labeled all kinds of folk magic as witchcraft. Wicca, they will tell you, is a religion that Gerald Gardner created in the 1950s. What these people often forget is that Gardner never referred to his followers as Wiccans. He never called his religion Wicca. There were always witches, and it was always witchcraft. The elders of the craft wrote books, and there are books about them, such as Witchcraft Today, The Meaning of Witchcraft, Witchcraft for Tomorrow, The Rebirth of Witchcraft, The King of the Witches, and so on. These books are about witchcraft, not Wicca. Many people will light some colored candles, maybe wear a pentacle necklace, and call themselves witches without ever reading a book and understanding the sanctity of what they are doing. Most social media witches today get their philosophy from memes or Tumblr posts and practice magic without training. While there is nothing wrong with do-it-yourself witchcraft, it is far different from the ways of the priesthood of the witch cult. This ends the speech on witchcraft. I deleted the original conclusion because, frankly, it sounded terrible. As I initially stated, I will break this speech down into more specific videos later on, but until then, blessed be.